Well, good afternoon, class. Welcome to the lecture on Yeats, Eliot, and the fragmentation of meaning. Today, we'll be exploring the works of two of the most influential figures in the Modernist period, William Butler Yeats and T.S. Eliot. We'll dive into how their poetry embodies the modernist obsession with fragmentation, allusion, and irony. These poets, in their reinvention of both form and thematic content, grappled with the disillusionment and complexities of the early 20th century, particularly the aftermath of World War I. But before we dive into the poems themselves, let's briefly define what modernism is. Modernism was a cultural, artistic, and literary movement that emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as a response to the profound social, political, and technological upheavals at the time. Modernist writers rejected linear narratives and stable truths, embracing instead the fragmentation of meaning and form. This shift reflected a world increasingly perceived as chaotic, uncertain, and devoid of fixed ideals, particularly after the horrors of World War I. Modernist literature often reflects an inner crisis where authors use techniques like fragmentation, stream of consciousness, multiple perspectives, and illusion to explore the complexities of modern existence. As we dive into Yeats and Eliot, think about how their poems reflect these modernist ideals. How do their innovations in form mirror the fragmented world they lived in? And how do they explore the alienation and disillusionment that came with living in a rapidly changing world? Let's begin with Yeats, who's known for his complex philosophical system, most notably found in his work of vision. Yeats's symbolism of the gyre plays a pivotal role in understanding his view of history. The concept of the gyre comes from Yeats's visionary system in his work of vision, where he imagines history as a series of interlocking gyres, two concentric spirals that represent opposing forces in the world, constantly moving in and out of each other. Each gyre represents a cycle of civilization, with one spiral symbolizing the rise and the other the fall of cultural epochs. Yeats believed that history operates in cycles of 2,000 years, each marked by a coming of age and a decay. The gyre system suggests that societies pass through phases of spiritual ascent and decline, culminating in a destructive breakdown before a new cycle begins. For example, in his poem, The Second Coming, Yeats uses the gyre metaphor to convey the breakdown of civilization. Yeats writes, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world." Here, Yeats's widening gyre suggests the disintegration of order, with the falcon representing society losing touch with the falconer, representing the spiritual or moral guidance. This is the moment when the center cannot hold, and anarchy ensues, an image that reflects the breakdown of established systems in Yeats's time. This idea of cyclical history is central to Yeats's thinking, as noted by critic David Atwell, who argues that Yeats viewed history as a constant oscillation between order and chaos, suggesting that, quote, the future is a cyclical recurrence of the past. And that's from Atwell's Yeats and the Modern Crisis. But let's turn to sailing to Byzantium, where Yeats grapples with the desire for spiritual transcendence in the face of aging. Yeats contrasts the physical world with the spiritual by longing for a place like Byzantium, which he portrays as an immortal city, a place of art, culture, and eternal life. However, we must consider the debates surrounding Yeats's portrayal of Byzantium. Is it a symbol of true transcendence, an ideal spiritual realm beyond the decaying physical world, or is it a form of escapism? Critic Harold Bloom argues that Byzantium represents an aesthetic retreat, a place where Yeats seeks to escape from the harsh realities of aging and death. For Bloom, Byzantium can be seen as a desire to withdraw from the material world into a realm of artistic and spiritual purity, where the poet can preserve his vision of beauty and immortality, rather than confronting the inevitable cycle of life and death. Yeats writes, quote, "That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms, birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song, the salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish, flesh, or fowl, commend all summer long whatever is begotten, born, and dies. Here, Yeats dismisses the natural world as something imperfect and fleeting, yearning instead for the timeless and immortal. But is this a true desire for transcendence, or is it an attempt to escape the reality of aging and mortality? Harold Bloom sees Byzantium as Yeats's, quote, retreat into art, an idealized place that exists as a form of resistance to change rather than an actual spiritual awakening. As you consider this question, reflect on how Yeats's longing for Byzantium relates to his view of mortality and the transcendence of the soul. Is he seeking something eternal, or is he simply retreating into an idealized fantasy? Now let's turn to T.S. Eliot's allusions in the Fisher King myth of the wasteland. One of the key techniques T.S. Eliot employs in the wasteland is allusion, the reference to other texts, myths, and cultural artifacts to enrich the poem's meaning. Eliot's poem is famous for its dense web of allusions drawn from religion, literature, mythology, and history. These allusions serve not just as references, but as commentaries on cultural decay, suggesting that contemporary life, bereft of meaning and coherence, is in a state of spiritual desolation. Let's focus on one significant allusion, the Fisher King myth, which appears in the Wasteland in the section titled The Fire Sermon. The Fisher King is a central figure in Arthurian legend. In the myth, the Fisher King is a wounded king whose land is barren, reflecting his spiritual wound. The only way the land can be healed is through the arrival of a pure knight, who can ask the right question to heal the king and the realm. However, in the Wasteland, the Fisher King is a symbol of cultural paralysis. The wound is never healed, and the land remains desolate. In the Fire Sermon, Eliot alludes to the Fisher King through references to sexual decay, with images of spiritual barrenness and disillusioned lust. For instance, quote, the Fire Sermon is filled with the sound of rivers and wasted lust. The Fisher King's wounds remain unhealed. This allusion suggests that the cultural wound of modernity, symbolized by the Fisher King, is not only unhealed but festering, perpetuating an endless cycle of decay. The land, the culture, the society is barren, and there's no pure knight, no true moral or spiritual savior to heal it. Eliot's use of this myth speaks to the spiritual decay he saw in post-war Europe, where people were disconnected from the cultural and spiritual values that once nourished them. Eliot's references to the Fisher King imply that the modern world, like the Fisher King's land, cannot be healed without a return to some form of spiritual renewal. But this renewal seems impossible because society is so deeply fragmented and alienated. Critic Christopher Ricks argues that the Wasteland, quote, uses the myth of the Fisher King to underscore a fundamental point. The quest for renewal is not merely a spiritual one, but a cultural and historical one, a reclamation of meaning from the ruins of civilization. That's from Ricks's T.S. Eliot and the Fragmentation of Truth. While Yeats's poetry is steeped in mysticism and a search for transcendence through artistic and spiritual isolation, Eliot presents a more structured religiosity, particularly in his later works when he embraced Anglo-Catholicism. This shift in Eliot's spirituality offers a fascinating contrast to Yeats's more mystical approach to the sacred. Yeats was deeply influenced by his mystical, magical philosophy, especially as outlined in his work of Vision, where he explored the idea of cyclical history and the possibility of spiritual transcendence through art. Sailing to Byzantium, with its yearning for the eternal, symbolizes Yeats' desire to escape the transitory nature of human existence and enter a realm of spiritual purity. His view of Byzantium reflects his belief in transcendence, a kind of retreat from the physical world to a place where the spirit can flourish beyond time and decay. Critic David Atwell notes that Yeats's Byzantium represents, quote, an aesthetic escape from the agony of the present, end quote, as Yeats sought a place of eternal artistry where the soul could be freed from the inevitable decay of the physical world. But does this escape represent true spiritual transcendence, or is it an act of escapism? Yeats himself was often in conflict with the idea of immortality through art, wondering whether it was a genuine spiritual aspiration or merely an artistic retreat. In contrast, Eliot moved toward Anglo-Catholicism in his later life, embracing a structured liturgical Christianity that was concerned not just with individual transcendence, but with communal and institutional salvation. His shift towards this religious form is most clearly seen in The Wasteland, especially in the closing lines, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. These words, Shanti, which are repeated 3 times, derived from Sanskrit, mean peace, but they raise questions about whether this peace is genuine or fragile. The repetition of Shanti may suggest a desire for peace, but also the fragility of that peace in a world marked by cultural fragmentation and spiritual chaos. Is this peace truly attainable, or is it ironic, a fleeting hope that can never fully resolve the tension of modern existence? Critic Helen Gardner observes that the final invocation of peace in The Wasteland is not a sustained hope, but an ironic acknowledgement of how difficult it is to achieve peace in the modern world. She writes, quote, "The peace Eliot speaks of in The Wasteland is not a triumphant end, but an acknowledgement that in the face of ruin, peace is fragile and precarious." Thus, while Yeats's Byzantium may symbolize a spiritual retreat or escape, Eliot's turn to Anglican ritual and the invocation of Shanti may represent a fragile, fleeting peace, one that recognizes the need for spiritual renewal, but questions whether such peace can ever be fully attained in a fragmented world. So, what are the common themes we can draw from Yeats and Eliot? We have fragmentation, allusion, and irony. Both poets use fragmentation to reflect the breakdown of meaning in modern life. Whether it's Yeats's apocalyptic vision in The Second Coming or Eliot's disjointed imagery in The Wasteland, both poets capture the alienation and crisis felt by individuals in a disintegrating world. Eliot and Yeats rely heavily on allusion to make their poems richer and more complex. In Yeats's Sailing to Byzantium, Byzantium becomes more than a historical city. It becomes a metaphor for spiritual transcendence. Similarly, in The Wasteland, Eliot's allusions to mythology, literature, and religion create a collage of cultural collapse, inviting the reader to piece together the fragmented meanings. Both poets use irony to critique contemporary life. Yeats's When You Are Old is full of bittersweet irony, addressing a lost love with the realization of what could have been. Eliot's Prufrock, with his repeated questioning and self-doubt, also uses irony to highlight the gap between idealized desire and realized inaction. So, to conclude, Yeats and Eliot both provide profound insights into the fragmented human experience of the 20th century. Their use of modernist techniques, such as fragmentation, allusion, and irony, force readers to engage with the uncertainty of the modern world. As you reflect on these poems, ask yourself, how do these poets' invocations and form serve to reflect their view of a fractured reality? How does the sense of alienation in their works still resonate today? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.